All right, my next guest needs no introduction, but we'll introduce him anyway. Mr. Peter Kessler. How are you, Peter?
I am well. I do need an introduction because unless you're 45 years or older, you didn't see my work on the Golf Channel, which ended 25 years ago. But lately, we've been introducing us to a younger crowd. And then my guys who were 45 or older, half of them are dead. So there's some new people here, and then there's some people who know me, and then there's some people who went bye bye.
Yeah, and that's actually, I mean, I'm over 45, so I remember you. Uh, but you're like the last link to history, to golf history, and we were fortunate enough to see you interview some of the greatest before they left us. Uh, you had an innate ability to extract stories from these guys and make us feel like we could play the movie in our head. Like Gene Sarazen, 94 years old, 1996, right? You know,
95, 97, but yes.
yeah. Well, it said 96, but
Close enough. He was born. He was the first great American golfer born in the last century in February of '02, followed closely by Bobby Jones on St. Patrick's Day in March of '02. So, two of the greatest players of all time, born in 1902. And there was only three guys who weren't alive from that century when we did the shows on the Golf Channel from 95 through '01. And it was Bobby Jones, of course, who died at 69 in 1971, Walter Hagen, who passed around the same time, and then Ben Hogan, when we started the shows, was too sick to be able to make it. He was close to being dead. So it was an amazing thing to have Sarazen, who I had already known since I was 20 and he was 70 because we played golf together with Reggie Jackson, totally random by accident in San
wow.
Diego in 1972. And by the third hole, Reggie Jackson and I figured out we were both dating the same girl who was who was running the gift shop. And Gene just loved the whole thing. I think he shot 71 or 72. He was 70. The ball did not move either way in flight, and he played super quick, and he was a joy. And I had run into him over the years after that. So when we got together in 1997, it was only one of two away shows. The other one was we went to Jack Nicklaus's house, and for Gene, we went just north of Atlanta to Chateau Alon, where he had a relationship and they sponsored him, and he would spend a great deal of time there. So Gene's family told me afterwards it was the best night of memory he'd had in too many years.
You did a great job of prompting him to remember. You did you did your homework. You did your due diligence, so you knew exactly what to ask him to
Well,
activate.
that's the secret.
Yeah, so you activated the but yeah, our algebra actually adds up. According what the hell is this? Hold on. But yeah, so you did a great job of prompting him through the sequence, and what it does is it brings to life those situations. So we've all read about the famous four wood at Augusta, and when he tells the story, it's almost as if you're standing there. And I don't think there's anybody that would have been able to prompt Gene to go into that thought pattern. I mean, you have a very soothing voice, and the way you asked the questions, the way you made had the guests relaxed, almost like if you're sitting there. It was great. Hey,
Sean
yeah,
Connery said to me once, he goes, "You know that everybody feels like they're in that room with you when you do those interviews, right?" I said, "Yes, I'm aware of that." He said, "But you don't know how you do it, do you?" And I said, "No." I said, "There's a lot of things, and you know this as an actor, Sean, that you have this gift and you got in touch with it like other people at the top of their profession, going back to Michelangelo and Da Vinci and McCartney and Lennon and Gershwin, the rarest ones of all time." And I said, "But once the camera starts, nobody really knows how that next part works, right? And he said, yes. He says, you just know that you can do it. And then I said, and you just stay out of your way so it can happen without you being involved.
That's actually a great description of it. And I was saying that our algebra works out because you interviewed him in '96 and he was 94 years old.
Who?
Gene
Sean or Gene?
Saracen,
No, that was 97 when he was 95.
95. Okay,
I
sorry.
could be wrong. We only did 1,300 shows, but I'm pretty sure it was
Wow.
97. I could be. Yeah, Seinfeld's 170 with researchers and writers and 800 comedians and great actors and these incredible people who were involved. I had nobody. I just had me. Because once I got to the Golf Channel, and it was all unorganized because it hadn't begun yet, and sometimes when there's disorganization, there's opportunity. And so for the couple of months leading into the first show on January 17th of 1995, nobody ever came to me. Nobody said, here's what we're going to do. All I knew was the name of two shows. And so I was completely left alone. So they offered me all these people, and I thought, well, I know more about golf than anybody on the planet. There's nobody who's going to be able to research it any better than I can. I know how to talk to people as well as anybody that I know. And so the only thing that I really need is for me to read everything about the next guest, then read it all again, then forget it all for 2 days. And then I had this ability where the script would actually just form in my head. And so then that became the script. And so it was very rare that I asked a question that wasn't in the script, either as a follow up or something else, except for that night with Gene. And the night with Gene, I took a chance because we had both lived within a couple of miles from each other north of New York City, just happened to be 50 years apart. But I said to him, Gene, 100 years ago, no, not 100 years ago, it was 70 years ago. Yeah, 70 years ago in the 1920s, I said, you used to take the train into New York City quite often, right? You liked the theater, your manager was there, you would get dressed up. I said, tell me what that was like. And he said, well, I would get on at Harrison where I lived. And he said, and then the next stop going into the city was Pelham. And he said at Pelham is where all the Ziegfeld Follies showgirls would get on the train to go in for rehearsal, dinner, and bang out the show. And Florence Ziegfeld, who was the impresario who was putting all these productions on, had bought apartment houses right next to the train station, and that's where they all lived. So he found this blonde who got on at 1:15 one day, which he did not forget at Pelham, and he started to flirt with her, and he said she wouldn't give him a tumble, which was a conversation and a flirt. And so he said, I did it all the time. And then 60 years later, in 1985, I'm playing in Bob Hope's tournament out in California, and I'm finishing up, and I'm in my 80s, and a guy says, a blonde woman wants to talk to you. He said, what does a blonde woman want with me? And the guy said, just come up to Mr. Hope's box. So he said, so I went up to Mr. Hope's box, and a blonde woman comes up to me, and she says, do you remember me, Gene? And Gene said, I looked her over, and I told her I didn't remember, and she said, well, I'm the blonde you used to flirt with on the train track 60 years ago, and I'd
Wow.
like to just introduce myself. My name is Mrs. Bob Hope.
Wow.
Good one.
But he had a bunch of stories. Like he caddied with Ed Sullivan. That's at Appowamus, he said.
That's right. And I only lived like 2 miles from there when I was living in Rye, New York, which was the next city next to Harrison, where he lived.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Rye. It's Westchester Country Club up there.
That's right. That's another 2 minutes away.
But
That's one of the greatest golf courses to Walter Travis, and
absolutely.
one of the greatest golf courses I've ever played. Walter Travis is the most unsung hero He also did Garden City Men's Club, Golf
The men's
Club,
club.
which is unbelievable because it's a combination of a linksland course and a parkland course all rolled into one. And I was lucky enough to give a presentation there, just telling stories like we're doing now a few years ago. And I was telling the guys there to get their attention right away that I'd had a conversation with Snead, Byron Nelson, and Gene Sarazen about who played Garden City better. Because Gene lived nearby, Byron caddied nearby, and Snead loved to spend time up in that area and was not from the Northeast, but just below it. But he went to New York all the time. And before he went the first time, somebody showed him a picture of himself in the New York Times, and he said, "How can they have my picture? I haven't even been there yet."
You would come up with that. So yeah. Well, with that being said, so I've actually played the men's club quite a bit. It's one of my favorites. It's probably in the top 5 golf courses I've ever
For
played.
sure. Yeah.
And well, bringing that to light now, in that interview, and we're going to go on to more other stuff, but this particular thing piqued me. You were talking to him about the 1922 PGA. He won the PGA and the U.S. Open in 22, right?
That's right. Beat Bobby
So
Jones by a shot and beat Walter Hagen.
okay, so I played Pelham Country Club quite a bit. The Deverett Emo, and where's Pelham Manor? It's right across, right across the border from the Bronx.
Right.
So
I've been there and played there, sure.
okay, so the 1923 PGA was probably the most touted event of its time. It was the Ali Frazier uh, of that moment. It was him and Hagen. And since I played there, I have friends that are members there. I'm not a member, but I was hoping that you would like go into that because that was a hell of a match. Like he stiffed it on the playoff hole to birdie it, and it was but you went instead to I think the 23 Open was played at Inwood with Bobby Jones beat Cruikshank, right?
That's right.
And there's a plaque there where he hits a 2-iron to 6 feet.
Yeah, it was a little farther away than he would normally hit a 2-iron from the hole, but he
That's
took,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I was hoping you had gotten into the 23 PGA, but you didn't. But hey, it's a great interview. So
Well, you're talking about the match where Saracen beat him in the playoff.
yes,
Oh
it
yeah,
was at.
well, they were really good friends, and they were uh, great rivals because at that point, because it was early enough in the 1920s, they were the two best players in the world. Okay, Gene and Walter, and Jones would start to join them with his first major championship the next year at the U.S. Open, which he won at Inwood, where he finished regulation with a double bogey. And then, of course, he won the playoff the next day. And coming to the last hole, there was a creek that you needed to be careful about. And Jones hit a shot into the right rough, or just slightly, and then hit a 2-iron to 6 feet. And Cruikshank had made a mess of his tee shot, and Jones didn't make the 6-footer. I mean, he still had to putt it
He
to have
missed
an
it.
official scorecard, but he missed the 6-footer. But it was one of those, yeah, like I really care. The other guy's making a 10. I could go ahead and 2-putt. And so from that point forward, Jones would win 13 of the last 21 majors in which he played, 13 of the last 21, and that most of them, half of them, included Saracen and Hagen. So when Jones finished his career with 4 U.S. Opens and 3 British Opens or Opens, it's the same number of combined Opens that Nicklaus won at 7 and Harry Vardon at 7. So those were considered his pro majors. And he won 5 U.S. amateurs and 1 British amateur, and that wasn't until 1930, which helped him complete the Grand Slam. But Gene and Walter were entertainers. And they knew in their heads that they had a responsibility to entertain the crowd. So they gave each other a really hard time. And on one particular shot towards the end of their match, their last round together, um, Gene hit one that looked like it was going into the houses. And the next thing we knew, the ball was now back in play. And Walter said, "There's a lot of Italians who live over there, Gene."
Some
And
spaghetti.
Gene won that playoff. And Gene later confirmed, he said, Walter didn't drink at all. He said the whole thing was a fraud. And he said he didn't stay up all night. He said he just put the tuxedo on before he went to the golf course. He said he killed more potted plants with whiskey than anybody, any gardener ever killed in the history of the world. So they were both entertainers and knew they had a responsibility to do that, where the guys today don't know the word entertainment unless it's just by their golf clubs alone. You know, Tommy Bolt said, he said, my job was to be an entertainer. Yeah, I'm trying to win the golf course, but there's fans there. I'm trying to make them have a good time. It was a different
Yeah.
mentality.
Yeah, I think they also had to supplement their income by barnstorming and putting on these shows with exhibitions and stuff. They probably did a lot of that, so they had a vaudeville act. I imagine they must have had some acts that they just traveled the country doing.
Well, that's why Gene missed the first Masters in 1934, because he was down in South America on one of those barnstorming trips. And that's right. So the idea was win a major, get some gigs. And they both knew it. And so they were, Walter in particular, really knew how to work a crowd. But Gene did too. He was just a little less flamboyant, a little less flashy, but just as exciting. And that golf swing was short and tight and accurate. And he was a no nonsense guy, like all those guys were who started as caddies. You know, 10 years after Jones was born and 10 years after Gene was born, you had uh, Sam Snead and Byron Nelson and Ben Hogan, all born in 1912. And then in 1916, even though Tommy Bolt lied about it all the time, but it was 1916 that he was born. And his family moved when he was a little boy from Oklahoma to Texas in a covered wagon.
Wow.
And Tommy was one of my closest friends. One day, and he lived not too far from me here in Florida at the time. And one day when he was 91, and I had played with him, I don't know, maybe 40 times or so in the previous years in his 80s, and he always broke 70. And he'd played from 6,300 yards on a really good golf course. And I had never seen him in a fairway bunker. I never saw him miss a fairway. I never saw him hit a bunker shot. So this one particular day when he was 91, we were up at the practice tee, and I said, "Did you hit a bunker shot for me? I've never seen you in the sand." He said, "What I be doing in the sand, boy?" And so he said, "Give me my 8 iron." I said, "Your 8 iron?" He said, "Give me my 8 iron, boy." So I gave him the 8 iron, and with his right hand from a little greenside bunker where he threw a handful full of balls down, and the pin and a lip and a downhill, and then the pin, because it was a practice green, was only about 12 or 15 feet past the edge. With one hand, with an 8 iron, he cleanly picked ball after ball after ball, when one grain of sand would have meant that the shot would expire right before his eyes. Hit it too heavy or hit it too thin into the face, and he hit 4 or 5 of them. And he goes, "Whoo, tough shot, boy." And then
With an 8 iron.
with an 8 iron. So we go out and play, and it was just the two of us. Usually it was just the two of us. And he had 16 pars. That's with all hitting all those greens. He rarely hit a chip. And then on one hole, he was just short of a green in two, a par five, and the pin was all the way in the back on this tiny little shelf. And there was like 50 or 60 feet between him and the beginning of the slope. Then you had to go up the slope and then another 10 or 12 feet. It's much easier to putt and get the distance right when the slope is in front of you. When it's farther away, it's much harder to get the touch. So I said to him, "What are you going to do here?" I said, "You can't pitch the ball because there's nowhere to land it and stop it." And I said, "You can't really putt the ball because the best you can do is hit it 10 feet from the hole, like Tom Watson at screwing up Carnoustie on the final hole in regulation when his ball went over the green. It was a really bad kick from the front of the green. And he decided to putt instead of chip. And of course, that's the way that you go when you're afraid. He was
Right.
afraid to chip. If you hit the right chip, it's going to be much closer. If you putt from over the green up the hill, you're always going to have the mentality of make sure you get it there. So you got it
Right.
there, just like John Rahm did on Sunday at the PGA on 15. He was long left. He had two options from his lie. He could either try to roll it up the hill and stop it around the hole or chip it, but he was afraid he wouldn't be able to pull the shot off. Why? Because John Rahm doesn't play competitive golf anymore except for the four majors. The other thing is a complete nonsense. That's why DeChambeau couldn't keep it up at the Masters. That's why DeChambeau couldn't keep it up at the PGA. And that's why Rahm lost what was even with Scheffler with 7 to play and then lost 7 shots over the next 7 holes. You can't show up part time, think you're going to be sharp enough to get all the way to the end in a major championship when you play member guest golf and you've given up your competitive career.
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing scrambles and shorts, I mean, it's not. I think golf has to maintain uh, its level of class. So it has to be classy. And
Well,
I'm
you
not
have
talking
to.
about exclusion. It's what they took was an iteration of the Phoenix event, right? The waste management with the noise and I guess that appeals to a subset of people, but obviously not enough to sustain a league or a tour.
Well,
So
you lose your edge because you're not playing in a real golf tournament. You could win on Sunday on the 6th hole. There might not even be a camera there because it's a shotgun. It's not real golf. It's not competitive golf. That's why all those guys are shooting a ton because they don't work on their games because they got the check up front. Why do you think Phil Mickelson can't play golf anymore? Because he doesn't play tournament golf anymore. Why did Brooks make 7 to miss the cut? You know, it's because they don't play golf anymore. Congratulations to DeChambeau and to Rahm for making it so far, even though I wish them ill because to me, they're just paid by the people who killed 3,000 Americans on 9/11. Not 11 of the 19 hijackers came from Saudi Arabia. It's a complete non starter. So I aggressively root against them. And the solution to this whole LIV business, which they're pretending they're still talking about 2 years later, there's nothing to talk about. There's one solution. I should be in charge of that relationship for one day, and I should be president for one day. It would fix up everything. And the solution to LIV is no more LIV, and DeChambeau and Brooks and Cam and John take all the money that they got from LIV. It goes into a pool for charity, and the players on the PGA Tour get to sit around and decide which charities get them until they all agree it's equitable. Then they go back on the PGA Tour. Then it's over for LIV, which is dying anyway. They have no revenue. They have no future. They have no fan base. I just started a channel on Instagram and YouTube a few months ago, and the guy who puts all the stuff up for me, because no chance I'd be able to do it, uh, said to me, last week when Fox ran that live event, they had 17,000 viewers on Saturday and 31,000 on Sunday, and he said I just put up Gene Sarazen talking about the forward shot last night. He said, how many views do you think we've had? And I said, 6,000. He said 190,000. Now it's almost at 400,000. I keep saying to him, what do I have to do to get the other numbers up there? And he's going, relax, we're doing just great support. I couldn't even how to figure out how to get on it for a month. It's Voice of Golf, but there's no spaces between the voice and the of golf. Couldn't find my own channel. So we were getting more hits than Live, and I don't even know where my content is. So they're really in trouble. But that's the solution. There's nothing else to think about. There's nothing to unify. Everybody was dishonest. Monahan's on the take. Ed Hurley, he was on the take. Jimmy Dunn was on the take. He just likes to be around stars. There's a word for that people use when you just want to be around those kind of people. It was all dishonest. Monahan is a moron. He couldn't run a lemonade stand at the top of the driveway. It was a disgraceful experience. And for people like Rory McIlroy, who can't even think straight for 2 seconds, is changing his mind every day about what should and what should not happen. He's not a businessman. And sometimes I wonder from inside of 100 yards if he's actually a golfer. And so when you get the players involved in those discussions, that's when you know it's total history. So I just want to let those guys know, you pay the money back. I'll think about with or without interest, and it goes to charity. LIV goes away. And then a guy like Cam Smith, who gave up his career at the age of 28 after kicking the stuffing out of Rory McIlroy at the Open Championship at St. Andrews, 21 putts, and I think Rory had 38. Why is he working with Brad Faxon? Brad Faxon was a great field putter. He was trying to reproduce a sensation that he felt in his right hand as if you were rolling a ball to the hole underhanded. Rory has hands of stone, and he gets so confused. And as I mentioned before, like Colin Montgomery before him, like Greg Norman before him, Rory hears, as P.G. Woodhouse wrote 100 years ago about another golfer, he hears the uproar of the butterflies in the adjoining meadow. I can't believe that he's been able to get done what he's been able to get done. But here's something important if the Scheffler-Rory thing comes up, which is Rory's 8 years older than Scotty. 8 years older. Scotty's at the beginning of his prime, and he's been number one in the world longer since 1922 when he first was number one than Rory has for his entire career. Been longer at number one. He's a better player. And if we consider them now having careers at the same time, Rory's near sundown. And at this point, Scotty's just getting going. He's going to have more majors. He's got 8 years. You think he's not going to get 2 more majors? Think he's not going to pass him in tour wins? He's a much better player. When they played together on Thursday and Friday of the PGA Championship, it was preposterous. Rory would hit a chip to 6 or 7 feet. Scotty would roll it up to the edge of the hole. He has the worst short game of somebody who's been one of the best players of his time. He is not the best player of his time. Scotty Scheffler already has got to keep it up a little while longer. But Rory joined the tour in 2010. Scotty didn't join until 2020. It's a 10-year gap on the join. And Rory had 5 great years to start and not been player of the year since. So Scotty's a better player. He's going to have a better record. He's a better putter. He has a better short game. He has a better mind. And the only thing that Rory's got, which is the most important thing he does have, is he is the longest, straightest hitter of the golf ball who ever walked the planet, unless he's got a dicey one at the end, like when he blew the U.S. Open last year and hit driver instead of 3-wood. The caddy's brain dead. And hitting that driver was one of the stupidest things he'd ever done. Day before, he'd hit 3-wood and he slopped a wedge onto the green because that's what he does. But he has 2 or 3 clubs less into the greens than everybody, including Scotty Scheffler. The other day, there was one hole where they both hit driver. They both hit a good one. Scotty had 150 in, and Rory had 115 in. And Scotty still put the ball inside him. But that's why Rory's putting stats aren't bad, is because he's hitting almost all of the greens, but he's hitting them all averaging pitching wedge, just like Dustin Johnson a few years ago before he left for the Crazy Tour. He went an entire season an entire season on par fours, never hitting a club longer than a 7-iron. He hit except for a 6-iron once, which he called a long iron, and he averaged 88 yards for the year to par fours because the equipment is completely out of control and it doesn't fit the field of play.
That's it's an interesting point, and to that point, to your point there with Rory, like I was predicting a triple crown, so technically he owns Quail Hollow, right? He's he's won 4 times there. He set the course record twice, right?
Yep.
The 7 events he's played there, he's in the top 10, right? So I figure, okay, Quail Hollow is a given. Oakmont is a toss up, okay? Royal Portrush, at the age of 16, like his debut year on the European Tour, he won and he set the course record there. He's in Ireland. So I figure, okay, he's got the Masters. He can win Quail Hollow. And he's got Royal Portrush, potentially. But as soon as he won the Masters, his demeanor changed. It wasn't like he's like, well, just what. And then he didn't talk to the press, and I'm like, there's something not. There's that feeling of greatness, right? Like you're good, you can do this. He didn't have that. He didn't. It's his voice. The tone of his voice was like he walked in there defeated. I don't know. So
I know why. Because he doesn't need it anymore. He finished his career at the Masters basically internally. He finally got the last piece of the puzzle. All these people are saying now he's going to win 5 more majors. No, he's not. He doesn't care enough. He's going to not work on his game hard enough. And he knows he's not the best player in the world. He knows for 100%, especially after Thursday and Friday when Scotty made him look like a 5 handicapper and Scotty was a +6. So he's got somebody who's better than he is. The thing that I did like about the PGA's field was that it did include the 4 LIV guys that you would want back on the PGA Tour, except you knew they weren't going to do anything, except they got a lot further than I suspected that they would. And congratulations to John Rahm for lasting so long before he realized where he was. But Rory McIlroy, I believe, is not excited about the future. I think he's now relieved about what he's been able to put together. And anybody who thinks that Scotty Scheffler in the next 8 years till he's 36, that Rory isn't going to trounce every single record that Rory McIlroy has and isn't going to be hands down the greatest player of his generation. He's the next Tiger. He is the next Tiger. If you give Tiger best player of his time from, say, 1996 through 2010, in the next 5 years, you would give it to Rory. He won 4 majors. I was setting all kinds of records. So 2011 to 2015, Rory had his time. Since then, Koepka's had 5 majors while Rory had none until the Masters. Justin Thomas, who's just turned into a horrible player now, had more majors during that time period. So he has not been number one for a long time because there's been guys who are better at majors than he is, and he's not the same man that he was as a young man. It's like after 2014, after 2015, it's like he didn't get dropped on his head as a child. He got dropped on his head as an adult. He's the worst thinker I've ever seen of a player inside of 100 yards. The club champion at Augusta National, they played each other from 100 yards and then all 18 holes to whoever the best player is. He would beat Rory 6 and 5.
Wow.
And
I
Scheffler
think
basically beat 6 and 5 too.
yeah, I think your description is, he's just complacent. He's done. That's the way he came across. Like,
and why
now that
wouldn't
I
you
have this,
why wouldn't you talk to the media? Why?
that's a good question. Well, yeah, he
There,
didn't
there are
talk to
no
the
good
media
reasons. There are
before
no
this.
good reasons. Um, you know, it's petulant. It's childish. It's acting like a spoiled brat because he knew that after Scheffler trounced him the first day, He didn't want to talk to anybody and have him say, Scotty was pretty good today, huh, Rory? And then on Friday, when he totally trashed him and crashed him, you knew that Rory had to just be despondent because there's a new sheriff in town. There's a new best player in town. Just like when Tiger became Tiger, anybody else who was Phil Mickelson knew that he wasn't going to be able to hang in, and he knew that by the end of '96 or early '97. And Vijay Singh and Phil were really Tiger's only competition. In that whole 15-year period that he would either, if he ever even bothered to look at a leaderboard, would have seen their names, but he knew he was much better than they were. And Scotty Scheffler, in his own quiet way, knows that he's the best player. The thing is, everybody says how boring he is, but I noticed that everybody watched the final round. Why? Because the new best player in the world was leading one of the four major championships on a Sunday with a good lead, and everybody watched because, like watching Tiger at Pebble with a 10-shot lead in 2000, and everybody still watched. So when he stretched it to 15, and I was with him and Butch on the putting green on the Saturday night at the 2000 U.S. Open, and I said to him, if they would give me my shots, Tiger, I said, I could win with your 10-shot lead. And let me tell you how he and Butch worked together. Butch, the three of us were just standing there, and Tiger wasn't even hitting putts. And then he looked at Butch and he said, excuse me, he said, I don't really like the way I'm putting right now, Butch. And Butch and I exchanged sideways glances. So Butch says to him, like Tiger was five, he goes, go over to the other side of the putting green for 10 minutes and just go ahead and putt. And Tiger came back 10 minutes later and said, okay, everything's fine now. And that's why the Hank Haney thing was a disgrace, what Hank Haney did to Tiger. And everybody else that followed that he listened to for 2 seconds. The Butch thing and the Tiger thing ended up on personal stuff, nothing to do with Tiger's game. Was the best swing anybody'd ever had, arguably, maybe along with Jones's swing. Jack's was a little unorthodox, but in terms of perfection and swinging on the semicircle, Tiger and Jones were the epitome of what you're looking for. So when Hank Haney, who had been working with Marco Mira, and he made it a round, flat swing, was able to get Tiger's ear because they were all together so much because they lived right next to each other, Mark and Tiger, and so the three of them spent a lot of time together. So Haney convinces him to come to Haney. Haney should have said, I understand why you and Butch broke up. It was personal. I get it. But you have the best golf swing anybody's ever had. So if we're going to work together, I suggest the way we do it is let me just be your eyes. So let me just watch you hit balls. And if you deviate in any way from where you were before, I'll pick it up and point it out to you. Instead, he wanted to be more famous. He wanted Tiger to use his swing. Hank Haney didn't have the experience. Hank Haney didn't have the talent. Hank Haney didn't have the knowledge. And he was so selfish to make it about him. But it didn't matter because if you were working with him, whatever swing you gave him, he'd still win the same number of tournaments that he did under Hank Haney because he could have won no matter what. He's still going to find the 6 inches behind and in front of the golf ball, no matter what Hank says to do this or to do that. Hank did it as an experiment. Hank did it to be more famous. It was really disgraceful behavior. I'm sure Hank will love this when he hears it.
So, but here's a point that I've been trying to make over the last few years is that a kid like Tiger, right, has been hitting balls since he was a toddler. Since he's been in diapers, right? He's had this the Latino kid, and Randy something was his childhood coach, and his father goes on to Butch. He develops this swing. At what point? So we had guys like Hogan, guys that dug it out of the dirt, guys that figured it out. Trevino, Mo Norman, George Knudsen. These guys are ball strikers. Tiger was at that level or better. He didn't need anybody. Once he left with Butch, and he got caught up with all these different motions, right? I think it, and I said it. He could have won what he won. He won. Could be said that he won despite Haney's tutelage. You know,
Oh, no
like
question about it. And then there was that goofy looking guy after that, and then there was Chris Como, and Chris Como knows as much about the swing as the guy who's operating your camera for you. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I can hear an echo. So yeah, that was So he would have won with any golf swing, and he did, because Haney likes to point out how good Tiger's stats were under his tutelage, because they were roughly the same as the ones he had under Butch. Because as Gary Player once said to me about the golf, the most important thing, and Gary Player said to me,
sorry about that.
so as Gary
Yeah,
Player, as Gary Player told me once, he said, you have to have ball sense. And what he meant by that is you have to have the ability to find the golf ball no matter what the lie and pull off the shot. He said, even if it's a straight downhill 200-yard shot that you've got to hit with a 2-iron, you've got to have ball sense. I'll tell you a quick Gary Player story while we're talking about him. I used to get invited to his house at Augusta to stay there, and a few years, my youngest son, went with me, and it was just his family, and my son and I would stay there. And then on Saturday and Sunday, after he did whatever he had, signing autographs and meetings and lunches and all that stuff, because he wasn't playing anymore, obviously, that Gary would turn on the TV, and then we would both sit on his couch, and he would invite all of his friends over who were in the neighborhood now for the weekend, and all of his family. So there'd be about 30 people in the room. So we would have the sound off, and I would host, and he would be the analyst. We were a lot better than any team that otherwise ever existed. And so the year that Jordan Spieth bogeyed the last hole and shot 64 to take himself out of having a chance to win, I went to myself, uh-oh, here comes trouble. Because 2 seconds later, they put up a graphic that said, best final rounds in Masters history, 64. Gary Player, Jordan Spieth, a few other guys. Gary sitting there like this, really mad. And I said, just relax. I said, in 15 seconds, the next graphic's going to come up, and it's going to say, the only player who ever won the Masters with the lowest score ever shot at the Masters was Gary Player. 10 seconds goes by, the graphic comes up. Still mad. So I said, now what? And for the only time that anybody ever spoke besides the two of us in one of these things, his eldest son, Mark, said, he's waiting for them to say he's the only person who won all 5 of the 4 majors. And he wanted to be recognized as better than everybody, as though there were a 5th mythical major and only he won that one.
Yeah, you've been around a lot of these guys, so you've seen and heard things that some of us are not privy to. But I mean, in terms of like the LIV stuff, Tiger Woods, what do you think about coverage? The coverage these days, television coverage.
The coverage he's gotten long term, or the coverage now, or
No, just television coverage in general. The networks.
what do I
Got a
think
whole
of
new
it?
slew of guys. Yeah. As you're watching.
You talking about Tiger specifically, or just coverage in general?
No, TV coverage of golf, the golf events, the golf tournaments.
It's the worst possible presentation that they could have. And part of the problem is the golf ball. For people who are old enough to remember Reggie Jackson hitting the 3 home runs in the World Series in the late 70s, when he hit the 3rd one off of Charlie Huff, it went 450 feet into dead center. That's a huge home run. Ohtani can do the same thing, obviously. What if the ball went 900 feet instead of 450 feet? The baseball would get out of the stadium so quickly you would never see it. You would never see the ball. You might catch it at the apex, but you really wouldn't, especially since so many of the games are at night and it's going to be past where the lights are. That's what's going on in golf. They've allowed the manufacturer to just go ahead and see how much they can play up against as far as physics will allow the ball to go. That's Mike Davis's fault. He was the head of the USGA for a long time, the worst possible choice. It's also the fault of the R&A for allowing it to happen. And right now, where we are is Jay Monahan, thinks that, that the ball going the distance it does now is good for the game because chicks dig the long ball. No, they don't. Why? Because it's the only sport where you can't see the ball. It's the only sport you can't see the ball. I can drive down the highway at 80 miles an hour and change lanes and have the hockey on 1/3 of my phone and see the puck as I'm driving. If I can do that, you should be able to see the ball on TV. But what do you get instead? A guy hits a drive, you get a red line to the left or a red line to the right and a rectangle in red that says target. What the hell is this? And the game isn't played from above. And even Rory McIlroy admitted that the golf course was 500 or 600 yards too short this past week because the ball goes 500 or 600 yards too far. Phil Mickelson right now hits it 70 yards farther in his mid-50s than he did in his late 20s. So it's completely out of control. And remember, the driver, too, starting with Big Bertha, the two events changed everything. In 1901, Coburn Haskell invented the modern golf ball. That's the ball that was played literally right through all of the eras, including Jack, until 1982. That's why you can compare Jones and Nicklaus. They hit at the same distance. Bobby Jones was not playing against a piece of tissue paper. It looked like that, but it was the same ball that Jack played. And then in the 1970s, Titleist reconfigured for the first time the dimple pattern, which was called an icosahedron, which my friend said, oh, that just means Bernie Hedron's house. And that made the ball have more lift. Then in 1982, Titleist invented a ball called the 384, representing the number of dimples. I was with Jack, totally by random at this point, because the Golf Channel had started. But Jack used to come down to La Costa in San Diego in the 70s to play the Tournament of Champions. And there were only like 30 guys in the field, and there were like 10 spectators. So I used to walk practice rounds with Jack right down the middle of the fairway with him and Angelo in 1972 and 1973. Arnold was there. Every great player. Gary Player was there. And so Nicklaus said, in 1982, I can't remember the event we were at, would have probably been one of the majors. And he said to me, he said, this golf ball, this new Titleist golf ball, the 384, he goes, it's out of control. And I said, I can't tell. He said, that's because you can't swing fast enough. And no recreational player can to be able to take advantage of the new properties. And he said, but what's happening is, he said, I'm 20 years older than when I was winning majors in the early 60s when I was my longest. And he said, so I'm not longer now, but I'm hitting it farther now because this 384 ball has changed the game of golf. And ever since then, and that's why you could compare records from 1901 when the modern ball was invented right until the early 80s. And then, of course, the Big Bertha came out in the early 90s and the club head changed size. So in Jack's words, and he continues to say this, in his time, in his prime, he said power was 20% of the game. He said now it's 80% of the game. He said, so it's completely changed the game. And I said to him, and there's no recovery. Since the last time I saw him was a few years ago. I said, now there's no such thing as a second shot with a 5-iron from the edge of the woods to a green where you're going to have to go over the wrong bunker, downslope is going the wrong way, and there's a breeze, and you're not sure if you can put spin on the ball. There's no more of that. There's no more mid-iron shots in golf. They're all gone. If you didn't have the awkward mid-iron shot, there'd be no Walter Hagen. There'd be no Arnold Palmer. There'd be no Phil Mickelson. There would no under Hank Haney be Tiger Woods. That shot is 70 by a step. That whole part of the game is gone. You have par fours. The guys are driving it close to the fringe. And as I mentioned, Dustin Johnson went a whole year averaging 88 yards. Lob wedge average for the year. So only Augusta National can extend the length of their golf course because they can buy up the town. And even it was playing too short. I mean, Rory hit driver 7-iron in the 15 that last day, the greatest shot he hit all day and one of the greatest shots I ever saw. It's the smallest landing area. It's a one club green in terms of how shallow it is. Just to hit that green and hold it proves how unbelievable these guys are. And that was the best shot he hit all day. I mean, from long distances, he's the standard. But once you get where touch and feel are involved, he's not the standard anymore. But Jack's been upset about this for years. The USGA and the R&A said they're going to dial the ball back in 2028. The manufacturers are saying, "Do you know how much money we're going to have to spend on R&D and how expensive?" There isn't any of that. It's all lies. There have been 250 golf balls released this century. Not once did you ever hear anybody say, not a manufacturer, not an article, not anything, "Boy, this new ball really cost us a lot to make." Why? Because it didn't. And it's a very, very low factor because every time you introduce a new ball, you have all these people shooting 95 who think they're going to hit it farther, which of course they're not. You take a 95 shooter with today's ball and versus a 2000 ball, they're going to hit it exactly the same distance because they don't have the swing speed to be able to take advantage of the properties inherent in the ball that lets it go so far. So there is no R&D. What does he answer then? Let's take a look at the mold from 2015. Nope, that still goes too far, like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Let's take a look at the one from 2010 from the mold. That's still too far. Go back to 2000. Let's see that first Pro V1 from 2000. That's the one that goes 40 yards shorter, and that's the one they go to. So the mold already exists, doesn't cost anything. They have the little man move to the right and use that mold to make the golf balls. So it's all lies. It's all about revenue. It's all about nonsense. And Jay Monahan doesn't understand the game because he was never really a player. And he thinks that distance is what everybody wants. And the players are happy to have it because they have nothing into the greens, which makes it more equal to the longer players for them because they're still, even though relatively shorter than Rory, have much shorter clubs in and therefore more opportunities for birdie. It's atrocious. The club head should be no more than 350 cc's, and the golf ball needs to be rolled back as it was 25 years ago. Like now, this 2028 stuff, what are you waiting for? Why are you listening to the manufacturers? You know they're lying, and Jay Monahan is just a wuss. That's it.
Okay, well, I think the golf ball has taken a lot of skill out of the game. I think players like Tiger, for example, he grew up in the era that I grew up playing in. It's a Balata era. So he says, "I want the spinniest ball because I know how to take the spin off. I've worked that field to take spin off the shots, right? I'm the biggest Big Bertha, just for scale. The biggest Big Bertha was only 280 cc's. An average driver right now is 460 cc's. So the biggest Big Bertha is the equivalent of like a 3-wood.
Like what Tiger won the 97 Masters with.
The King Cobra deep face, that 9-degree driver he had, exactly.
Yeah, I remember it well. Yes,
43-inch shaft and 43-inch steel shaft. So he's still an old school carryover. He's playing blades, and he's looking for Bridgestone to get. In I think 1998, the USGA went to that. Tried to address the trampoline effect. You remember that, the coefficient of restitution?
So that's how I lost my job at the Golf Channel.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because Arnold endorsed a golf ball made by Callaway that whose coefficient of restitution, or its trampoline effect, to put it into English. So when the ball hits the club face, it gives like a trampoline. So there was a number. It was 0.82 of one. The club that Arnold endorsed was 0.83. So in theory, it might be able to give an expert player a couple of extra yards. Nobody in golf said a word until I got on TV with him and I said, "You are Mr. History, Tradition, Integrity, and the rules. For you to do this takes away everything that you stand for if you endorse this club."
Wow.
And he said, "All my friends have been calling me cheaters." And I was like his son at that point. I mean, he didn't have a son. I didn't have a dad. And he said to me, "If you call me a cheater," we were on live TV. He said, "If you call me a cheater, I'll punch you in the mouth right now." And I thought to myself at the time, because everything seemed to move very slowly for me. I've never felt like I had to rush or anything. And I thought, well, this is great TV, but I'm going to lose my job over this. And so I kept trying to give him ways to get out of it and didn't get it done. But he had promised me at breakfast, because I knew we needed to talk about it. And he sits at the first table in the grill room, facing the door 5 feet so everybody can see him. I said, "When is enough enough? How much adulation do you need? How much adoration do you need? You know, you can't even eat your breakfast because you're busy glad handing." And I said, "You're not letting us have the conversation." We had that kind of a relationship where we could say that and he wouldn't get fussed about it. And but I said to him, "Don't have more than one drink tonight. Promise me. Promise me you won't get drunk before the show." So in the darkness, in between Golf Central ending and Arnold then coming from the wings to come join me on Golf Talk Live, he was doing a 5-drink weave. He was, I knew, I couldn't tell you however many drinks he had at any time. And he's doing a 5-drink weave. And I thought, do you want to change some stuff up? Do you want to make this easier? Is there a way to make it easier as he's walking over? And it's funny, I did 1,300 shows. All of them were live. Never made a mistake, except it's the one thing, and an important thing, that I should have changed the way I phrased the setup. Because very often he would tell me something away from the Golf Channel, and then I would translate it into English on the Golf Channel and say to him, "Tell me, is this not exactly what you said or meant?" And I would state something that he may have never even said ever, no matter what, but I wanted him to always look good. And he would say, "It's exactly what I said," when of course he never said it at all. But that night I should have said to him, I said, your position this morning was, okay, so you can use this club of you hit balls on the range. If it brings more people into the game because they think they're hitting it further on the range, that's a good thing. If you play alone, you can use an illegal club. Just can't turn in a score. If you play with your friends and nobody cares, you can still keep scores for your matches, but you can't turn in the score. So you can use it in a lot of different circumstances. You just can't turn in a score with it, and you can't compete with it. If I had just said that, he would have said, "That's exactly what I said." And that would have been the end of the subject. I wouldn't have said another word. I would have gone right on to, "Hey, speaking of distance, when I played Latrobe Country Club with you at your home for the first time in 1994, and then talk about a particular spot. They said, if I can't carry this creek, I get to the point where I can't carry this creek over the tee, I'm going to stab myself in the heart with a 1-iron that I'll have snapped in half." And I should have gone to that. But I didn't. And if he hadn't been so drunk, anyway, so it's the one misgiving. But I knew either way. I mean, if I had said that, everything actually would have turned out fine. But I didn't say that, and it's hard to get every single question right and every setup, and to feed them the people material exactly perfect every time. But that was the one time I didn't get it right. And that's 1,300 shows. Seinfeld's 170 shows with writers and directors and comedians and all sorts of 1,300 is a lot of live shows. So The other thing is, it was the end of the seventh year, and I had been aware, like most people, that a lot of TV series had 7-year runs. Whether you're an old timer and you go back to Desi and Lucy or the Rockford Files or Friends or Seinfeld, everything was 7 years. And there were times I went, why is it 7? And as I finished my last show of 2001, right after which I got fired, I realized why 7 was the magic number. It's because you finished the work. 1,300 shows, 3,000 guests, 3,000. And I knew during the last show where I lost my train of thought for the first time ever, I went, I think I finished the work. And then I got fired, which is why I was fine with it on the one hand. I didn't want to lose my job, but I didn't get cheated out of any opportunities. I mean, Tiger had been on the show starting when he was 20, and he'll be 50 in December.
Yeah, you had
Oh,
to put his
I
hat
didn't
on
finish your other
backwards.
question about the TV golf. The blimp is the stupidest thing that's ever come along. Golf is not viewed from above. There is no context when they use the blimp. It could be any course, anywhere when they're looked down. What are you looking at? You're not looking at anything except the paycheck that the blimp company gave you to use the damn blimp. And then the blimp like goes real fast to go to the green, and it's going back and forth still to this day. They never know where the ball is. They never know where the ball is. And then it goes back to the front of the green because they couldn't find it at the other side of the green. And it's the same damn thing off the tee. I watched Tiger hit many more than 2,000 shots in major championships where I stood 10 feet behind him on the tee, right at the back of the tee, nobody in front of me, right on Tiger's ball target line. And in the early part of his career, I could follow the ball all the way. Once it got to 2000 and Nike gave him the hard ball, I couldn't pick it up in flight until it reached its apex. So I knew things had changed and were going to continue to change. The announcing is insipid. Somebody makes a double bogey, and that genius Gary Koch would say, "Oh, he didn't need a double bogey there." Oh, really, Gary? Which hole does he need the double bogey on? And and for him to have made a career out of saying better than most, the only thing anybody can remember of anything he'd ever done. Is a terrible announcer. They're all terrible. Nance is like a grandmother. He's so solicitous, and he's so rooting for Rory. I mean, think about the last hole of regulation. Rory hits a perfect drive and then hits the ball from 100 yards into the right bunker. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And so Nance didn't say a word. Then he splashes out a very iffy bunker shot. Then when he missed the 6-footer, which you could have bet all your money on that you'll ever make for the rest of your life that he wasn't going to make it, he's the worst putter from 6 feet as a professional that I've ever seen. And he's the worst good putter of any really terrific player who's ever lived. But when he missed the 6-footer, Nance said, and we go to a playoff. I was so unhappy about that particular choice of phrase, that obvious rooting, the not calling out the obvious. That was a really sloppy bogey. And I was surprised that he was able to have the same shot in the playoff and actually get the distance control right. Because the reason he has so much trouble with his playing inside of 125 is his hips move as fast as they do with his driver. All good players, if you watch them, once they get down to impact, their hips are not way ahead. It's as though they get to impact and then everything turns through to the left. It's really good advice for recreational players on 30-yard pitches. You turn your belly button an inch to the right. Once you do that, your weight's now on your right side. Then you can lift your arms up. Recreational players just lift their arms up. You can't do that. You have to move weight. But the way to move it is you turn your belly button 1 inch to the right. It'll keep moving, and then you can lift your arms up. And then the idea is on 30-yard pitch, because the half swing at half speed, is to feel everything line up and impact, and then everything goes around and to the left, and you finish facing the target with your torso left of the target, not at it, not just short of it. You watch any clips of Tiger hitting 30-yard pitches, it looks like the last second half of a swing that he hit a driver. You finish the swing. Golfers expend energy downward, so the whole thing dies just after impact. If you gather pace through the hitting area, gather pace like you're going from 50 to 70, eventually getting onto the highway. If you gather pace, you'll get 3 more feet of swing. If you get 3 more feet of swing, then you're going to hit it higher, straighter, and more accurately. And anybody who watches you go from doing this to doing this will say to themselves, well, I haven't been there in 30 years, or I've never been there. If you're going to just have one swing thought as a recreational player, it's make sure you finish in a full balance finish. Don't think about how to get there. If you just think about, I'm going to finish in a full balance finish with my torso facing left of the target, because if a little short, then you've eased into it a little bit, left of the target, it'll fix 10 things that would have preceded it that could have gone wrong. It's the best swing thought. Make sure you finish with full balance finish, and that's it. And then in your mind's eye, instead of having a 60-page checklist of how the swing is made, the only thing you should see in your mind's eye is the target, the target. And when you got your ball over the whole swing, the target in your mind's eye, because that's where you're going. You want to be thinking about where you're going. You don't want to be thinking about, you're supposed to do this and you're supposed to do, you don't have time for any of that. When Tiger sits his ball behind the putter and he's just ready to go, and if you said to him, what are you thinking right now? The answer would be nothing. Nothing at all. Because he's just going to get ready to reproduce a feel of his right hand that he knows will give him the amount of energy required on the right line to put the ball into the hole.
That's interesting. So it sounds like you had the courage to stand by your convictions, even in the face of, you faced Arnold down about the situation. Is that the first time you talk about that?
Maybe not, not that fully, but for me, it was just like I didn't have to think about it. I just didn't have to think about it. And I knew right from wrong. I knew right from wrong. And after that, Sports Illustrated called me a symbol of integrity, and I said, "Those fools." And but for me, it was the easiest decision. I didn't think about, hey, wait a minute, do you want to do this? You said upset Arnold. President of the company, Joe Gibbs, hated me anyway. He was just jealous because he thought he should have been on the cover of the magazines. No, Joe, you're a bald, ugly piece of white trash, and you are not a good human being. And it's not about you. You are an accountant. You're not an on-camera person. You don't know anything about golf. Now that I didn't say to him, but that's how I felt about him, and he knew that. And that first cover story came out May of '99. He was so pissed off about it, and it was as though my mother wrote it on the day that she loved me the very, very most. And he was just jealous of my relationship with Arnold, jealous about the way that the public felt about me, and so I knew no matter what I did, he wasn't going to be happy, and I didn't care. And I didn't really care what anybody thought, because I never thought that there was like competition for me. When you're the best at what you do, you don't think about that. Jack didn't think about that. Da Vinci didn't think about Michelangelo. Well, that's not true. Da Vinci thought about Michelangelo and vice versa, but they respected each other. But when you don't have any competition, you don't think about competition. So I never thought about that. And I never thought about the girls at the network either. Never went out with one of them. Why? Because I would get up in the morning and I would climb the scaffold like Michelangelo to paint the ceiling. I knew that was my opportunity. I knew that those were the good old days before it even began. I would call on everything that I knew, everything I could do, and then I found a whole other group of skill sets that I didn't know I had when I started to write the shows. So I was so focused. And then when the ceiling was finished and I painted the last little corner on the last show of the last year, I knew I had finished the ceiling.
Well, I think that, you were the end all and do all at that show. It was a startup. It was a venture. It hadn't been done before. And as far as I'm concerned, and my recollection, you were the face of the Golf Channel. I mean, you did Golf Talk Live. You did the instruction. You'd fill in and you'd do some instruction, interview coaches, and get on the set with the, teaching professionals and the Butch and Tiger, and you were doing everything, in my opinion. Okay,
True.
so I had stopped. I wasn't watching. Then I said, "Whatever happened to Peter Kessler? Where is he?" I was like, "It's you were on so often." But then again, you say like the 7-year run, right? So you have a 7-year run, then the guys make more money off the reruns than they did off the original. Bro, I don't know if that's the case with you.
But
You
yeah,
know
no,
what I'm talking about?
I never got paid for because it was a cable channel. They, I totally didn't get paid. Like I got, and I'm the worst negotiator that ever lived. And it was like I didn't really care. I knew they were screwing me on the money and everything, but I didn't want to negotiate. I didn't want to go hire an agent. I was happy to just do the work. I knew I could have made zillions of dollars if I'd gotten a great agent or a great lawyer. I just never really even thought about it. I was just getting ready for the next show, and and I realized that obviously that I was all they had. And after a couple of years, I was the one who recommended Rich Lerner because I'd been on his radio show that he had in Dallas. And he called me and he said, I want a job at the Golf Channel. I said, well, go ahead and apply. I'll walk down the hall right now and tell him to hire you. And then by that time, Scott Van Pelt had now gone from putting tapes on shelves to being really good on Golf Central. So I went down the hall to Joe Gibbs's office, the president, and I said, Joe, if I go down in an airplane tomorrow, I said, what have you got? I said, so give Rich Lerner his own show. Let him do whatever he wants. It'll be completely different than what I do. I would welcome a couple of guys, to like try to get up to my level. And I said, and if you don't give Scott Van Pelt a show, he'll be gone next year. And he was gone the next year. I mean, it was just foolish. And unfortunately, uh, Joe's response was that Scott was smarmy. He said, that's not the right word. I said, he's got a fun edge to him. I said, that's one of the things that makes him different, but he really understands sports. Golf less so, but he's got it. And he didn't like Lerner because of his religion. And I said, I'm the same religion. And he said, no, you're an Italian,
Kessler, Lerner,
you're an
Kessler,
Italian,
Lerner.
you're an Italian Catholic. I said, no. I said, I tell girls I'm Italian. I said, but I'm not an Italian Catholic. And that's how they didn't get the shows. And that's the kind of guy he was and is. And it was really bad. And, but he was a great investor. He had made a lot of money before he got to the channel. And he took the idea from somebody in Alabama who he's friendly with, but he was smart enough to run with it. And he was smart enough to get Arnold. And then they were smart enough to go to Tim Fincham and sew up the library and get the coverage of the events. So that part was brilliant. When it came to me, he was just lucky that I happened to come along and put them on the map. I know what I did, and it's like it's fine. It's like I was called the voice of golf, but stuff like that would like just run off my back, and none of that stuff's important. The only thing that matters is what do I think of me? What do I think of me? So I don't care about being a polarizing figure, which I am and can be. I was less so then, but it's all Glenn Fry's fault of the Eagles because in 2000, I was with him and Jimmy Buffett at some celebrity thing, and we were in one of their rooms, and I said, and there were some party favors involved, and I said, you guys aren't that great. I said, I could write a song in 5 minutes right now. Give me a guitar. You give me a guitar right now. I'll write you a really cool song in 5 minutes. And I went ahead and wrote a song right that minute with Jimmy's guitar. And he goes, I'm really glad you're not in this business. He said, if you can do that in 2 minutes, he said, that was really good. And Glenn Fry then said to me, he said, Peter, he said, you're just too nice. He said, you need to have a little edge. You need to be a little polarizing. He said 90% of the people who listen to the Eagles love us to death, but 10% really hate us. And he said, those are the people we're interested in because they send in hate mail. And he said, we don't even look at the nice letters. We take the hate mail and we sit in a circle and smoke pot. And we just, every next guy reads the next hate letter. And he said, we fall hysterical all over the place. So it's Glenn's fault, God bless him, rest his soul, that he was the one who said, be more interesting off camera.
Okay. Well, that's interesting because my buddy Louis, he's an actor, and he was on this Stars Network show. I forget what it was. It was a very crime-oriented thing. It was actually written by 50 Cent. And he's playing a Dominican drug lord in New York, right? So all these episodes are going, and he's making money, and all of a sudden his character gets killed. So I'm playing golf with him in the Bronx, and I said, Louis, so what happens now? He said, oh no, he's dead, but I'm still getting paid per episode. I said, wow, that's cool. And he said, you know who I have to thank for that? He goes, who? He says, Trixie from the Honeymooners. Ed Norton's wife, I forget, it's not Joyce Randolph was
Joyce Randolph was his wife, was Ralph Crandom's wife.
North Norton's wife, Trixie. I
Yeah,
forget her name.
Norton's wife. Yeah, Norton's wife, right, yeah.
Norton's wife. So she sued at some point, and somehow she got all because they were rerunning and she said, "Wait a second, this is my likeness," and so she sued at some point and won, and that became what it was. I was just asking him about that.
Well, I'll tell you just a quick thing that occurs. Uh, Playing golf with Sean one day, he said to me, how much do you think I got paid for Dr. No, the first film? So I knew it was going to be a low number just because of the way he asked it. And I said, $100,000. And he said, $10,000. And
Wow.
it wasn't until he met Micheline, who became his wife and business manager, that she went and negotiated the deal starting in like 66 or 7. And then she had to go to the companies that were running it on TV and got him residuals. And that's how he finally got paid for being James Bond. It's a weird thing about performance. He and I had that in common. Like he was interested in the work and he did want to be paid, and whoever was acting as agent didn't do a good job, but he thought well, I'm going to make the same amount of money next year, so what does it matter? But performers can be notoriously bad at fending for themselves for money and in negotiations and all kinds of things like uh, computer stuff can be foreign to somebody who's an artist. Mathematics can be a difficult subject.
The left-sided
So
brain.
yeah, just the way that you're wired.
It's a creative side versus
Yeah, and Sean considered me more than he considered anything else about me. He considered me to be an actor. He said you're a different person every single night, depending on who's on the show. I said, well, you're the only other one besides me who knows that. And he was the greatest 18 that ever lived. The first
He was an
time,
18.
huh?
He
The
was an
greatest
18 handicap.
the greatest 18 handicap, and I'll tell you why. The first time we played, he had just turned 70. He was turning 70 that year. And I got invited to spend a whole week with him and two other guys down in the Bahamas at Lyford Key, where he lived. The address on the front of his house was not a number, but it just said out of bounds. And so the first round, the tournament's a week long. You get one day off on the Wednesday, like it goes on forever. And after, so he would, as an 18, he would miss most of the greens. And like every player that can't break 90 had a 30-yard pitch left from somewhere. And I noticed that he left his 30-yard pitches short of the bunkers, not like everybody who tries to hit a 5-wood on the green and ends up making a 7 or an 8 because the ball goes in an unexpected place and always a bad place. So I noticed he laid up short of the bunkers when he knew he couldn't hit the green. So that was the first thing I noticed about his short game. So I said somebody told him that. Then I saw him hit his first 3 30-yarders to 15, 18 feet, and he made the same swing every time. And I knew he was doing the start the swing with the belly button thing, which Nick Faldo is the only pro that I know who actually will talk about that he starts his swing by turning, like keying the ignition. If you turn it 1 inch to the right, it's going to keep going and everything's going to go with it. So after the third shot, his third 30-yarder, I said to him, "Who taught you that 30-yard swing?" And he said, "Peter Alice," when we were getting ready to do Goldfinger. He said, "I didn't know how to play golf." And he told me, he said, we started with short shots. And he said, "Just turn your belly button 1 inch to the right. It'll keep going." He said, "But then in like another sports shot, it makes you go from this side, this way to back to the target. Otherwise, you're static over it." So he'd miss all the greens, but he'd hit all the pitches to 15 feet. And sometimes he'd make it for par. And then other times, he would just two putt. So he was the greatest 18 that ever lived because he never did worse really than bogey for net par and a lot of pars for net birdies. We won gross and net 2 years in a row. He was hilarious to be with. But yeah, the greatest 18. Never had to hit bunker shots because he laid up short of everything. It was brilliant. And if recreational players who can't break 90 would do that, you turn a lot of 6s and 7s into worst case 5s.
Yeah, you'd have more 14s than you'd have 18s. But he was supposed to, there was talk at one point that he was going to back Michael Murphy's book, Golf in the Kingdom. And he would play one of the characters, Seamus McDuff, I think it was one of the, I don't know.
Yeah.
That never materialized, but that's one of the
Thank
classics
God.
endorsed by him. Yeah.
So glad he didn't do it. The book had meant absolutely nothing. It was all gobbledygook. And and I mean, I know I'm just about the only one who goes, "You don't like Golf in the Kingdom?" No, it's nonsense. It's not how anything works. Nobody thinks any of those things. Nobody's doing any of those things. But it's an enchanting book. It's just not to be taken too seriously. It's like Aesop's fables. What some people say, well, that's what the Bible's really like. It's a bunch of tales written by other people who didn't even know Jesus. And that's why
It's allegorical, yeah.
that's why it's the gospel according to Mark and according to Matthew, not according to Jesus.
Right. So what were you doing before the Golf Channel? Radio or what?
I was always really lucky in interviews, and a friend of mine when I was 23 or 4, my dad was gone, and he was a friend of my mom's. Did a lot of work with the Rothschild family of Europe, the most famous banking family in the world. And when I was 24, he was at my mom's house, and he said to me, I said, "I'm going over to London soon." And he said, "To be with Jacob Rothschild." And I said, "Well, that's nice." And he said, No. He's the most important banker in the world at the most important bank in the world. He said they set the gold price every day. And I said, "Oh, well, that's fantastic." And he said, "They're looking for a young American to join them and then come back and forth and do things, buy assets in America." And I had zero interest. So I go with him. I do the interview. There's 5 million guys who want the job. And 2 months later, the letter came, "You're hired. Can you please come over?" So I had just gotten married. We went over, I think, almost to the day on our first wedding anniversary. And a few weeks into it in 78, they came to me and said, "Here's $25 million. We want you to," I knew nothing. "We want you to go back to the States and buy us interests in oil and gas." I said, "Right," thinking oil was for salad dressings. So I called a friend, and I called another friend, and I figured out what we really wanted was to own an interest in a lot of oil wells that were already in existence, and the stuff was coming out of the ground and being sold. You don't want to get involved in drilling. So on a Friday, I closed a deal for us in New York for the 25 million to buy an interest in 500 producing oil and gas wells in 10 states, like 1% interest. On the Monday following, Iran had the first oil embargo. The price of oil doubled over the weekend. So the 25 was now worth 50. So they said, we're going to give you a really big raise. So I got a raise from $15,000 to $22,000. Shrewd negotiation on my part.
Wow.
So they moved me back to New York to open up an office, and I did that and did a bunch of stuff for them for a while. And then I became kind of a marketing expert on Wall Street. I was able to take really complicated deals and simplify them into a few sentences for stockbrokers to tell their clients about. Really good at it, but it didn't bring me much satisfaction. So on my 35th birthday, I woke up and I went, that's it. You're going to do something else. I knew about my voice. And I went, so take 5 years, try to break into the entertainment business. And if you don't make it by 40, then find a better job or one you like better on Wall Street, since you get it. So by 39, I had become the voice of HBO Sports Television Network and narrated the cult documentary When It Was a Game about baseball, which I still think is the best documentary, not forgetting Ken Burns' extravaganza.
That was Ken Burns, right?
But this was different. This was for HBO Sports, and this featured in-color footage of baseball players in the 30s and 40s, because Kodak invented the motion picture camera for the public in the early 30s. So the baseball players got one, and Mrs. Babe Ruth took videos of this daughter on the swing and Babe in the dugout. So this group of guys who were friends with HBO Sports had accumulated about 50 hours of this material out of people's attics. And a friend of mine said, hey, they need a free 5-minute reading. So I went down to somebody's office and typewriters and all kinds of noise, excuse me, and I had never done it before. And so there's a TV, and they hand me a script, and they said, okay, we're going to start to roll the tape. And he said, so you just read along to the picture. So I went, well, you'll have to look up and down. So that's what I did. I looked up and I looked down. So when it said Babe Ruth, it wasn't showing Lou Gehrig. So I did the 5-minute piece. I didn't stumble. I enunciated it right. I killed it. And 6 months later, they called me back and said, would you just read the whole show, even though we're not giving you the job right now, but we want you to read the whole piece so we can edit to a voice. So I did that. 6 more months went by, and they went, okay, this is it. We want you to officially be the narrator of When It Was a Game. So I said, great. So on Friday in July, early July of 1991, I went down, and this time I was, I don't know, just about 40. And I went down and read the whole hour script. And then they got James Earl Jones and Jason Robards, some other famous actors to read baseball poetry. And then I went into HBO and then read it for real. You know, by that time I had memorized it. I had a photographic memory, so it was super easy. So I banged it out, and I think they ran it on July 7th. And on July 11th, I got a call saying, the response is overwhelming. How would you like to be the voice of HBO Sports? And I said, I would like that very much. So I became the voice of HBO Sports. But you only have to say stuff like, this has been a special presentation of
HBO Sports.
They only need one of those. So, and they don't make a documentary every day. So it was like every third Friday I'd go in and read stuff. It happened to be that I had read golf history from the time I was 11 until the afternoon before I went down to HBO Sports, several days a week. My favorite subject was golf history. I followed golf as closely as you possibly could. I played it. I loved it. And the history I read I had 300 or 400 books at one point and read them all 20 times. And the guys at HBO came out and played golf with me. I guess I let enough stuff seep out that they knew I knew more about golf than anybody that they knew. But what they didn't know is that I knew more about golf than anybody in the entire world. And so they said to me, we were just hired to hire the on-air people for the Golf Channel. And how would you like to host a show on Monday night with great players, maybe have some teachers on Tuesday and Wednesday, talk about what's going on in golf over the weekend? I said, yeah, I'll do that. So that was all in New York. The studio is going to be in Orlando, and they all went down to Florida. And the guy who wanted most to hire me, who was going to be the executive producer, called me one day and he said, I'm having trouble getting to close your deal because you've never done anything on camera. He said, yes, I know you've acted in plays and you were a public speaker and you're going to be all going to be fine. And he said, so they just want me to check to see your knowledge of golf history. And I went, great. So next Wednesday at 3 a.m., I get a phone call. Hello, Peter, it's Mike. What's the matter, Mike? Who was the first famous female golfer, Peter? Mary, Queen of Scots. Good night. And I hung up the phone. So he called back the next day and he said, nope. I said, wrong. Nope, you got the question wrong. I said, you asked me who was the first famous female golfer. And that was Mary, Queen of Scots in the 1560s, who teed it up the day after she murdered her husband. And you're thinking of who was the first famous female professional golfer. And the answer to that question is the one you were looking for, Babe Zaharias. Goodbye.
Babe
I hung up.
Dickinson.
So so this went on for a couple of weeks. They couldn't find anything obscure enough to bother me. And finally, they asked me a question about the 1935 U.S. Open at Oakmont, where it's going to be played this year. And one of the competitors in the event, who was an obscure player, who was really a 75 shooter, thought that 75s would win at Oakmont that year. And so what he did was he went ahead and played the course 9 holes every day for a couple months because he lived in Pittsburgh. And he was the first guy who started pacing off yardages from a bunker to the middle of the green, then from the tree to the back of the green. So he's the first guy to ever do yardages. So I knew more about this guy than his mother. And then the next day I got a call and said, you're hired, and your first gig is to go spend a week with Arnold in October at Latrobe, play golf with him, make him fall in love with you, interview him, and then you'll come down to Orlando and we'll go on in the air in January. And there you go.
Wow. That was a pretty good story. Now, Joe Gibbs was these two roles, Arnold and Joe Gibbs. Well, who was what there? I mean,
Joe Gibbs took the idea for the Golf Channel from a friend of his in Alabama, and then Arnold stayed at his house during the PGA at Shoal Creek in '90.
Shoal Creek, yeah.
And so he arranged for Arnold to live in his guest house for the week, and he told Arnold the idea, and they kept talking, and then finally Joe got him to put in $1 million as Joe had put in money. And then they were smart enough and to do the obvious. You go see Tim Fincham, you get the rights to the footage, you get the rights to show the events. So Joe was the president of the company. Arnold was the other co-founder and the chairman. Arnold showed up once a year for a show, and Joe thanked God for me, and but he didn't thank me. And so Joe was in love literally with Arnold and treated him like he was his dad, even though he was younger. It bothered Arnold no end. And he hated when I was with Arnold. One day I was at Bay Hill eating lunch with Arnold and some other guys before a round. Joe walked in with the company accountant and he got to the table and he let it slip out and he went, "What are you doing here?" and I'm sure you would have taken it back. And I looked at Arnold and I said, that wasn't a very nice thing to say, was it, Arnold? And at that point, Joe sort of slithered off with the accountant and went and had lunch. But yeah, he hated my popularity. He hated I was responsible for their success. He hated my relationship with Arnold. And right after he fired me, 2 weeks later he resigned and off he went to bother more people.
So Joe Gibbs resigned.
He was what?
Joe Gibbs resigned after
Yes, everybody knew he was leaving at the end of that December of '01, and the last thing he did before he left was to fire me.
Oh, okay, okay. So
Sweet guy.
what have you been doing since the Golf Channel?
Oh, all kinds of things. I invented the hybrid in 2002. I wrote long form magazine articles for Golf Magazine for 2 or 3 years, including the one where Phil said Tiger's the only player good enough to rise above the equipment that he's stuck
That
with.
he uses, yeah.
And I had a radio show for 10 years. And I have 8 zillion hobbies. So I don't think I've ever been bored, ever, like literally, because I always feel like there's such a long list of things that I can do that I'm interested in. I mean, I'm kind of expert on the Renaissance and Da Vinci and stuff. I went through a phase about 5 or 6 years ago where I was pretty sure I had been Da Vinci, and and that Michelangelo used to come over to Leonardo's house, and I would be invited, and I wasn't Da Vinci at that point, and that Da Vinci made the worst vegan lasagna that anybody ever ate, and Michelangelo would spit his out into the napkin, and so we were born 500 years apart. So he died at 67. So when I was 66, I was going, are you going to die next year? And you could. I went through a brief period of, are you out of your freaking mind? And so I've gotten past the having been Leo part, and but no, I have a zillion things that I do. I have a puppy that I love. I take really good care of myself. I weigh what I weighed in high school and college, pretty much, and. No, so I have a very full life, which is why I don't. I everything that I've done is just like that was great. That was great. Golf Channel is great, and I've never ever. People ask me this a lot, and let this be my last answer to you. I've never regretted doing what I did with Arnold because it was just the right thing to do. It was just like I didn't have to make a decision. I knew it was wrong. I knew I was going to call him on it and let the chips fall where they may. I didn't want to lose the job, but I also knew that the job had been completed. And it reminds me of Greg Norman saying to me in an interview one day, he said, do you think I ever woke up in the middle of the night in a sweat thinking I haven't won the U.S. Masters, the U.S. PGA, or the U.S. Open? And I said, yeah, every night at 2 a.m. you are awake going, I won. I lost all of those in playoffs. I lost all the majors in playoffs. So I never woke up once, or really at any other time, had the feeling, my God, what have you done? Because I didn't think that at the time either. It's just I have a really strong moral compass, and right is right and wrong is wrong. And one of my gifts is that I've never been intimidated around celebrities or anything. And no different talking to you than it is to talking to Sean Connery. And they all sensed my comfort level. I mean, I spent 3 hours with John Lennon, the Beatle, one night at a dinner, sat with him for 3 hours. Then Mick Jagger joined us. We went out for a stroll. When we came back in, my mother was standing there, and she was beautiful and 42. And Mick introduced himself to my mother as Michael Jagger. And I'm going, get her number, get her number. I want to be friends, get her number. And she goes, where have you and your hooligan friends been? It's John Lennon and Mick Jagger. So she looks at the two of them. She goes, first of all, you need to cut off the hair. And it's not too late to make something of your life. It's not too late. And there you go.
Great, Peter. I really appreciate your time, and maybe we'll do it again sometime. I enjoyed listening to you. It was like bringing back old memories, and I really appreciate the fact that you would dedicate some time for me.
Well,
Thank you very
it's
much.
my pleasure. I mean, we've been going just under 2 hours, so you may want to break you
Yeah,
may want to break this up into bits,
yeah, I will.
and I'm sure you know how to do that. And,
Yeah,
you can build up an audience for this particular chat because we killed it
yeah,
together, and you know, 2 hours is a long one, but
yeah,
I don't.
absolutely.
The only thing we haven't discussed is women, which is a good thing. So we can talk about that next time. And I was delighted to be with you. You're great at what you do. I like the way that
Coming from
you
you.
you just gave me the room to do what I do, and you pretty much asked me pretty much everything on your list plus a couple extras. So I'm aware of the skill sets that's required, and you have it in aces, and you have killed it. And if you tell people to watch some of my stuff on Instagram and YouTube on
Absolutely.
Voice of Golf with no spaces in between voice and of and golf, which took me a
Hmm.
month to find my own material online. So I would appreciate
I'm
that.
going to
And,
send you, when I post these shorts, there's going to be an invitation to collaborate, right? So when you hit that invitation to collaborate, the shorts will come out on your feed. And
uh
that brings, yeah. So just hit that, and that'll be part of your feed.
Okay, I'm gonna have to explain. I don't have anything to do with the stuff that goes up. I have a 30-year-old guy who's finishing his PhD in broadcast journalism. So it's like all the subjects I know, and we're getting straight aces, obviously. And in turn, he's taking my material and putting it up and stuff. So I'll tell him about the collaborate thing, and he'll know.
Thank you, Peter.
Great to be with
It's been
you.
fun. All right.
Great,
Bye.
great pleasure. Great pleasure. You're great at what you do, and I really enjoyed the time. Talk to you soon.
All
Take
right,
care.
Peter. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.